Hello, and thank you for joining me today on The Political Conversationalist. My name is Ben Phipps, and this is the very last video on systems of government. I was getting bored, and this is my forte. Anyway, so as a good place to end, because I realize that I'm in the U.S., and I would say the vast majority of people who are going to see these videos are in the U.S., I wanted to talk about how the U.S. government is structured, because it is a little confusing. A helpful tip is to think of the U.S. government kind of like the nesting Russian dolls. Kind of like, boop, there's another doll, boop, there's another doll, kind of thing. So, in U.S. government, tends to always be a struggle between federal rights and state rights. And there are also cities and counties, which make it more complicated. And then there are 5 continuously inhabited territories that are owned by the U.S. government. So, let's talk about the federal to begin with. There are 3 branches, and this is part of a system called, or a concept called checks and balances, whereas no one person or small group of people has too much power, so the power of the nation is divided federally into 3 branches. First we're going to talk about is the legislative branch. The legislative branch consists of the House of Representatives, which is commonly called Congress, and the Senate. And the Senate they're both elected by the public at large, and the Senate is kind of a little bit higher and has fewer members than Congress. Congress is based on population. Senate always has 100 members in it, period. So they work together to make federal laws. So basically how it'll work is either a member of Senate or Congress will propose a law. They call it a bill until it is signed into law. So they'll propose a bill, and then Congress will vote on it. Out of all the multitude of, it's over 300 Congress members, out of all those, they will vote on it. If it passes through Congress, it will go to the Senate. And the Senate can vote on it and revise it and change some things. And if it passes through the Senate, it will go to the President. And the President can either sign it or do what's called vetoing it, which vetoing means he will not endorse it. So if the President doesn't agree with the bill, he won't endorse it. It's not the complete death of the bill, though, because it will go back to the Senate and can be passed if they get a high enough majority of Senate members. So the legislative branch, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate, make federal laws. The second branch we're going to talk about is the executive branch, and we already mentioned it. It consists of the President, the Vice President, and the Cabinet. Of course, the President is the most important of these. The President is the figurehead of the nation. He's the face of the nation, at least to the outside world. Commander-in-Chief of the military. And of course, he has the extreme power to sign and veto federal laws. Another thing is he also is responsible for appointing federal judges and also Supreme Court justices. That's also a very, very important thing. It's a very powerful ability to have. The Vice President has a lot fewer powers and typically serves as the chief advisor to the President. If the President becomes, goes in a coma or dies or whatever, the Vice President will become President. He's the first in line. And the Vice President also will break a tie in Senate because Senate has an even number of members. So if it's a 50-50 split, the Vice President will vote one way or the other and make the deciding vote. That very rarely happens, but it has happened. And the Cabinet. The Cabinet is the 15 heads of state departments. So we're talking like the Housing and Urban Development Department, things like those, or Department of Defense. Those heads, those people at the top in charge of those departments, are appointed by the President, and then they are approved by the Senate. So you can still see the checks and balances. They have to work together for anything to happen. So the President appoints who he chooses for those positions, but if Senate says no, he has to choose someone else. Thirdly is the judicial branch. And the judicial branch includes the Supreme Court and any other federal courts. And their job is to apply and interpret the law, specifically the Constitution. The Supreme Court really focuses on the Constitution. Now, remember how I said Russian nesting dolls? The states, most of them, are directly modeled after the federal government and have just a smaller version of that. Now, states supposedly have all power that is not explicitly given, as in if the Constitution does not say the federal government does this, then the states are supposed to be able to do that. For instance, marriage laws or abortion laws or speed limits, things that the Constitution doesn't mention, supposed to go to the states' rights. Doesn't always happen. But anyway, they also have 3 branches of government. Their legislative branch is a House of Representatives and a Senate, and that varies by the size of the state. The only state that doesn't have that is Nebraska. It just has one house, which is called a unicameral system of legislative government. So one house. Sometimes the cabinet in states are elected. Like for instance, in North Carolina, the Attorney General is someone we vote on in our elections. And that would be on a federal level someone the president appoints. Then there's also the executive, which is like we talked about the cabinet, but there's also the governor and the lieutenant governor. The governor is, of course, the most powerful person in the state. Does similar things to the president, as in signs in and vetoes laws, state laws. Appoints people that aren't voted on. A lot of positions that aren't voted on in some states are appointed by the governor. And the lieutenant governor is similar in a lot of ways to the vice president. The lieutenant governor will normally break a tie in Senate if there is one, and is also the first in line should the governor, for whatever reason, be unable to continue being the governor. And there's also state judicial branches, and that is state courts and state supreme courts, and they apply and interpret state laws. So, important thing to note about the state laws, though, is that the Constitution explicitly says where if a federal law and a state law conflict with one another, federal law always wins. So it just kind of cemented that the federal law is more powerful than the state laws. There are also counties and cities. Counties and cities have no power under the Constitution. All the power of counties and cities comes from what the states allow them to have. Counties normally have commissioners and like councils. Same things with cities normally have mayors and councils. And they normally deal with things like infrastructure, like road work or power companies, electric lines, water lines, things like that, as well as budgeting and taxing and things like that. So they have limited power, and it's all given to them by the states. So they're not like another Russian nesting doll inside of it. They are basically managers. Because they have no power explicitly, the states give them power to manage that area, because it would be impossible for the governor to manage the entire state by himself. Also, there are 5 inhabited territories of the U.S. Now, they're structured similarly to states in a lot of ways. They have kind of a similar system of government. They'll have normally 3 branches, and in some ways they are allowed to govern themselves, and in some ways they are not. They are taxed like states are, and they pay taxes to the federal government, but the federal government doesn't give them really representation. Each of the 5 continuously inhabited territories does actually have a representative in Congress, but it's a non-voting representative, which means that they can only debate on the floor. They can't actually vote when it comes time to vote. So, very, very limited power, and you could also kind of call them puppet governments. Puerto Rico is the largest of them by far, and Puerto Rico actually has a kind of a pseudo-military called the State Guard that is used for emergencies. And also, of course, the National Guard of the U.S. has a detachment down there to protect them. So they are under protection of the U.S. government. So they're not really countries, they're not really states, they're territories, and it's not really a fair way to treat them, but that's the way it is. So anyway, I hope you learned something today about how the U.S. government is structured. I hope you're as excited as me that we're finally done with systems of government. We can talk about more important things. And I hope you'll come back next time to hear about what we're starting. Our new series is going to be on divisive issues. It's going to be things like abortion and gun control, gay marriage, transgender rights, all those really hot topic issues. That's what we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. So make sure you stay tuned. Thanks for sticking with me through this somewhat boring section, all this foundation work. But now that we've got this under our belt, we're going to move on into the fun stuff. And if I missed any system of government, or if there's anything you feel like I need to explain more, make sure to let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.